Welcome, you curious deep diver. We've all felt that chill, right? That creeping unease when you realize there are things in this universe utterly beyond our comprehension. But what if those truly terrifying monsters, the ones that lurk in the darkest corners of literature, are actually reflections of something far more unsettling? Maybe the anxieties and ideologies bubbling beneath the surface of our own world.
That's exactly what we're digging into today.
Today, we're plunging headfirst into the murky, cosmic depths of one of literature's most unsettling and, let's be honest, profoundly problematic minds, H.P. Lovecraft.
Yeah, problematic is definitely a word for it. Our mission in this deep dive is to explore the intricate, often uncomfortable connections between Lovecraft's famous cosmic horrors and the very real-world anxieties, his deeply personal fears, and, well, the strongly held ideologies that shaped his unsettling tales. We'll be taking a stack of fascinating sources, from rigorous academic analyses of his fiction to candid discussions on his personal philosophy and prejudices, to unearth the hidden meanings and surprising insights. Things that often go unexamined when you're just enjoying a chilling story, you know?
Think of it as your shortcut to truly understanding the chilling genius and, yes, the deeply problematic undercurrents of the man who gave us Cthulhu, the Necronomicon, and so much more. We've gathered a rich collection of academic papers and critical essays that meticulously analyze Lovecraft's unique narrative techniques, his philosophical influences, and most crucially, the socio-historical and personal anxieties he embedded, sometimes consciously, sometimes, well, maybe not, into his work.
Yeah, that conscious element is interesting.
We're going to unpack how his personal fears, everything from profound societal change to his deeply ingrained racial anxieties, manifested as monstrous allegories in his singular literary universe. And perhaps what that can tell us about our own world and the fears we manifest today.
By the end of this deep dive, you'll not only have a much deeper appreciation for the unique mechanics of cosmic horror, but also, we hope, a genuine aha moment about how literature, even its darkest corners, can serve as a profound, albeit sometimes disturbing, reflection of its time and its creator.
It really makes you think about what artists project into their work, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
So let's truly unpack this. Kicking us off, let's talk about what truly sets Lovecraftian horror apart. When you hear horror, you might think of, I don't know, a slasher villain in the shadows, or maybe a ghostly presence in an old creaky house.
Right, the usual suspects.
But with Lovecraft, it's something far more unsettling, something that really burrows into your psyche, isn't it?
That's exactly right. Lovecraftian cosmic horror isn't about simple scares or traditional monsters. It's a unique blend of, well, utter hopelessness and an uncanny sort of gnawing dread. Its fundamental core is emphasizing human insignificance in a truly vast, indifferent, and often, frankly, malevolent cosmos.
Indifferent feels key there.
It is. This isn't designed for cheap jump scares.
Yeah.
It's about the slow, creeping, terrifying revelation that our perceived reality, everything we believe to be true and stable, is actually just a fragile construct. A construct that can be easily shattered by truths that lie so far beyond human comprehension, well, they drive you mad. The core horror is understanding how truly small, meaningless, and ultimately inconsequential we are in the grand scheme of things. It's a profound blow to human ego, really.
And this chilling idea, this sense of being utterly dwarfed by the universe, leads us to what's known as the Lovecraftian sublime. I find this concept absolutely fascinating because it completely flips our usual understanding of sublime on its head.
Right.
Traditionally, when we think of the sublime, gazing at a majestic mountain range, standing before a vast, churning ocean, or even contemplating the infinite stars, it usually inspires awe, a sense of transcendence, maybe even a feeling of divine connection, of rising above ourselves. But in Lovecraft's world, it's the exact opposite.
You've hit on the crucial distinction there. The Lovecraftian sublime consciously inverts that traditional humanistic sublime. Instead of inspiring awe or elevating the human spirit, the encounter with the majestic, the vast, or the truly ancient in Lovecraft's work instills an overwhelming existential dread.
Yeah.
It often leads directly to madness, a quick death, or maybe a forced, horrifying acceptance of what one academic calls a miscegenated and no longer human condition.
Oof, that phrase.
Yeah, it really speaks to the horror of dissolving into something alien, something that's not just non-human, but actively monstrous. The triviality of humanity isn't just a side effect of this encounter. It is the core, horrifying revelation.
Mm.
Humanity isn't just small, it's utterly meaningless, a tiny speck in a cosmic ocean filled with entities that don't even register our existence likely.
And this meaninglessness, this ungraspable, unimaginable horror really comes through in Lovecraft's prose itself. You see it all the time. He often struggles, or perhaps more accurately, his narrators struggle, to describe the true horror they encounter. You see it in his frequent use of words like unnameable, unspeakable, indescribable, cyclopean, or non-Euclidean. Many might initially mistake this for, I don't know, poor writing or a limited vocabulary.
Right, like he couldn't think of a better word.
Exactly. But it's actually a very deliberate rhetorical device, isn't it? It reflects the absolute impossibility of truly symbolizing, of truly putting into human language the real.
That's a keen observation. This linguistic struggle highlights what philosopher Graham Harman refers to as the vertical gap and the horizontal gap in Lovecraft's writing.
Okay, tell me more about those.
So the vertical gap is the profound chasm between an unknowable object itself, the true, terrifying essence of Cthulhu, for example, and its tangible, describable qualities. You can describe its shape, its texture, its smell, maybe its gargantuan scale, but you can never quite capture its true essence, its fundamental otherness.
You just can't grasp it fully.
Exactly. Then there's the horizontal gap, which occurs when Lovecraft, or more often his narrators, pile on an overwhelming number of adjectives. You know, like a nameless, indescribable, unholy, cyclopean thing.
Ah, yeah.
It's an accumulation and overuse of terms that ultimately blurs and obscures rather than clarifies the description. The narrator's struggle to articulate the creatures they witness isn't a failure of their vocabulary, but a deliberate literary choice by Lovecraft to convey that some things are simply beyond human language, beyond human comprehension. It's part of the horror itself.
So we're talking about a reality that's just too much for the human mind to handle, where language itself breaks down trying to convey it. This brings us to a really interesting philosophical toolkit that helps us understand Lovecraft's fractured reality, a framework proposed by the influential philosopher Slavoj Žižek.
Yes.
He talks about a triad of the real. To really grasp the true depth of Lovecraft's horror, it's like we need a set of X-ray goggles that lets us see through our everyday assumptions about reality. Can you walk us through Žižek's 3 layers of reality?
Of course. Žižek's framework offers a powerful lens to understand how reality is constructed and then utterly shattered in Lovecraft's work. First, we have the symbolic real. Think of this as the operating system of your mind, maybe, or the comforting framework of language, rules, and beliefs that we all share.
Okay.
Our day-to-day reality.
Pretty much. It's our everyday, perceived, and known reality, fundamentally shaped by language and ideology. It's what Žižek calls a lexical construction, a pure ideological construction that offers us a way to escape, or at least suppress, the truly traumatic, real that lies underneath.
Right, the thing we don't want to look at.
Exactly. When Lovecraftian heroes try to describe horror, their failed symbolization full of obscure passages and an abundance of those blurring adjectives we just talked about precisely reflects this. It's their desperate, ultimately futile attempt to fit the unimaginable into known language, and it invariably fails. It's why so many of them go mad. So that's our comforting, constructed reality. It's what keeps us sane, in a way. But then there are moments where that reality starts to crack, where the cracks begin to show, right?
Yes, those unsettling cracks are where the imaginary real comes into play. These are the inconsistencies, the uncanny traces of supernatural events, the things that simply don't make sense that appear within the symbolic real.
Like a glitch in the Matrix.
Sort of, yeah. Think of the subtle whispers in the night, the odd shadows that seem to move just beyond your periphery, the inexplicable occurrences that disturb the accepted order. These aren't full-blown monsters yet. They're signals, hints that something is fundamentally wrong with the accepted reality, suggesting a deeper, more unsettling truth lies beneath.
Little clues something's off.
Exactly. For example, in many of Lovecraft's settings, like the invented decaying New England towns such as Arkham or Innsmouth, you often find initial uncanny disturbances, strange smells, odd architectural details, hushed rumors. These are the imaginary real, moments that don't quite fit the comforting symbolic framework.
And finally, there's the big one, the one that utterly shatters everything, the direct collision.
That would be the real. This is the traumatic, intolerable truth that exists before any symbolic order, any language, any ideology. It's the raw, unassimilable thing that our language and ideology work so hard to suppress, to build a comforting, symbolic real around.
The thing itself.
The thing itself. When a Lovecraftian protagonist encounters this unvarnished, naked real, it doesn't just disturb, it utterly shatters their existing symbolic reality. It establishes new, terrifying rules of existence, making what was previously impossible possible and what was once unthinkable suddenly manifest. It's a direct confrontation with a primordial chaos that cannot be contained or understood by human means. It's the ultimate unraveling.
Wow, okay, that distinction really helps bring these abstract ideas to life. And to illustrate this triad even further, let's look at some of Lovecraft's most iconic entities through this very lens. Let's start with Nyarlathotep. He's incredibly distinct, often seems quite malevolent, and he appears in so many disguises, from an Egyptian pharaoh to an enigmatic, dark-skinned man.
Ah, the crawling chaos. Nyarlathotep is a particularly distinct cosmic archetype in Lovecraft's sprawling mythos, and utterly terrifying in his agency. Unlike many of the more passive, monstrous entities, Nyarlathotep seems purposefully malevolent, actively infiltrating humanity disguised under morphing masks to further some twisted, incomprehensible agenda.
He seems more active.
Very active. What's fascinating here is that to assume he has a human-like agenda, to try and pin him down with concepts of good or evil, actually humanizes him and strips away his true cosmic elements. Yet, as the offspring of Azathoth, Nyarlathotep is centered around the spread of gnosis, and here, gnosis isn't spiritual enlightenment, but rather a terrifying, forbidden knowledge that utterly shatters human sanity.
Knowledge that breaks you.
Precisely. It's information our minds simply aren't built to process, revealing truths too horrible to bear. He embodies the infiltration of an external, maddening agenda into human affairs, often serving as a perverse messenger for unfathomable truths. His appearances often signal the beginning of the shattering of the symbolic real, a direct challenge to humanity's comforting illusions.
And then there's Azathoth, often described as this mindless, amoral, all-powerful entity at the center of all infinity, surrounded by his piping, subservient entities. Sounds cheerful.
Azathoth is indeed the boundless demon sultan, a truly monstrous entity who embodies pure, unadulterated chaos. He is a border being that defines society's ultimate limits, a cosmic entity that should be avoided at all costs because his very existence is the antithesis of order and meaning.
Pure chaos.
Absolutely. His presence represents a primal, unthinking chaos that shakes the very pillars of existence, a truth so fundamental and horrifying that its revelation means the complete unraveling of all known reality. He's the ultimate real, the intolerable truth that, if directly encountered, would obliterate all symbolic constructs and plunge existence into meaningless oblivion. He is the cosmic indifference personified, utterly mindless.
And of course, the big one, the tentacled terror himself, Cthulhu. He's the most famous, the one everyone knows, from plush toys to memes. But what does he truly represent within this philosophical framework?
Cthulhu, yeah, he's almost a brand now.
He really is.
In many ways, Cthulhu represents an abstract anxiety that materializes into a tangible, if still utterly alien, monster. The terrifying implication of Cthulhu isn't just his physical monstrosity, but that his awakening and the success of his widespread cults would literally transform human society from within. The monstrous would become the new normal, hence no longer monstrous. If Cthulhu indeed awoke from his eons-long slumber beneath the Pacific, society as we know it would cease to exist, and what was once deemed monstrous and abnormal would become the reigning accepted order.
Wow.
This is a very potent allegory for how an abstract societal fear, if fully realized and allowed to fester, could utterly reshape our reality, establishing new, terrifying rules of existence. He's not just a monster. He's a paradigm shift waiting to happen.
So we've deconstructed the cosmic dread itself, the pure, unfathomable horror. But what's truly unsettling, and what the sources really highlight, is realizing that this cosmic dread didn't just spring from Lovecraft's imagination. It was profoundly shaped by the very human, often very dark, anxieties bubbling beneath the surface of his own world.
That's the crucial link.
Now let's pivot to the very human and often deeply problematic anxieties that fed Lovecraft's monstrous creations. It's impossible to truly understand his fiction without acknowledging the real-world upheaval he was living through.
You're absolutely right. Lovecraft's personal background is crucial here, providing the soil from which his nightmares grew. He yearned for an almost aristocrat past, for a sense of old world order and tradition that he felt was rapidly slipping away.
A past that maybe never really existed in the way he imagined it.
Quite possibly. He was profoundly unable to assimilate the reality of a rapidly changing America, a country undergoing massive modernization, significant waves of immigrant movements, a burgeoning acceptance of democracy, and the brutal emergence of modern capitalism. His fiction, in a profound sense, served to repress his reality, to create a fictional world where he could process or perhaps displace and sublimate these overwhelming and deeply unsettling changes. He was quite literally creating his monsters out of his fears.
So his monsters weren't just made-up creatures from beyond the stars. They were allegories, dark mirrors reflecting the historical, social, and economic monsters of his time. The anxieties he felt were given shape in his stories.
That's a key insight, and one that the academic analyses really drive home. His monstrous world can be read as a fictional representation and allegory of the key issues and distresses he perceived in the United States after World War I.
Right.
These real-life monsters included the relentless march of industrialism, intense social struggles between classes, profound paradigm changes in science and societal values, and the lingering trauma of a recent global war. The figure of the monster in his work powerfully reflects cultural traits and how societies understand the world during periods of deep anxiety and flux. It's how the invisible fears become visible horrors.
And a major real-life monster of that era, one that truly pierced deep into U.S. society, was the Red Scare and a pervasive fear of alien infiltration.
Oh, absolutely.
Post-WWI, the U.S. saw massive waves of immigration, especially from Eastern and Southern Europe, and even Russia, which directly fueled fears of proletarian insurrection and socialism.
Yes, the fear was palpable, almost a national hysteria. This, combined with growing labor dissatisfaction and strikes, led to the Red Scare, a period of intense anti-radical and anti-immigrant sentiment. It was a time when fear of the other was weaponized.
It sounds incredibly tense.
It was. Many immigrants were seen as a direct threat, often unfairly blamed for a cooling economy or for bringing dangerous foreign ideologies. The government even ran explicit Americanization courses for immigrants, designed to strip away their cultural identity and mold them into what was considered a proper American citizen.
Wow.
This atmosphere of fear and suspicion of an other infiltrating and changing the very fabric of society from within undeniably seeped into Lovecraft's narratives. His stories became a canvas for these collective anxieties, projecting them onto otherworldly entities that corrupt and destabilize, acting as powerful metaphors for the cultural purity he felt was being threatened.
And this brings us to one of the most troubling and frankly indefensible aspects of Lovecraft's work, his undeniable fear of the other, which often manifested as overt racism and a profound obsession with miscegenation, the mixing of races.
Yeah, we have to talk about this.
It's hard to read some of his stories without confronting this directly, and it's essential we do so to fully understand his work.
Indeed, it's a critical and uncomfortable part of his legacy that must be addressed head-on. Take The Shadow over Innsmouth. This story isn't just a monster tale. It's a direct literary attack on what Lovecraft perceived as immigrant invasion and intermingling with the Teutons of New England.
So it's explicitly about that fear.
It really is. The horrific Innsmouth look, which results from miscegenation with the Deep Ones, these monstrous fish-like humanoids, is a stark, visceral rejection of the notion of the melting pot. Lovecraft explicitly saw the melting pot as a failure of America's politics of racial assimilation, a threat to what he considered a pure racial stock.
Incredibly blunt.
It is. The story's narrator, discovering his own mixed blood and slowly transforming, experiences this horror firsthand, underscoring Lovecraft's deep-seated fear of corrupting the New England blood. The town itself is described as a synonym of corruption and degeneration, with its crumbling physical state unmistakably mirroring the biological and social corruption that Lovecraft believed was inherent in racial mixing. It's a powerful, if deeply disturbing, allegory of his racial anxieties made manifest.
And it wasn't just about mixing with non-humans. Even within humanity, he saw problems. At the Mountains of Madness, there's that whole dynamic between the Elder Ones and the Shoggoths.
Yes, that's another layer. At the Mountains of Madness, the destruction of the Elder Ones, who were actually portrayed as intelligent, artistic, even scientific, and for Lovecraft, implicitly equaling humans in their capacity.
Right, they're not just monsters.
Exactly. Their destruction by the inferior Shoggoths, described as rebellious slaves, the strangers, can absolutely be read as an allegory for racial anxieties about uprisings or the perceived threat of subordinate groups overwhelming a dominant one.
And wasn't there a comparison to a subway train?
There was. The amorphous protoplasmic Shoggoth is even compared to a subway train at one point, which directly recalls Lovecraft's own documented revulsion towards the crowded, diverse immigrant masses he encountered riding the subway during his time in New York. It links the cosmic horror directly back to his very specific earthly prejudices.
His anxieties were quite broad then, extending beyond just one group. Look at the dreams in the witch house.
That's right. Witch covens, a recurring motif in New England folklore, are depicted in the dreams in the witch house as a real menace for society, specifically because of the degenerates involved.
He uses that word degenerates.
He does. And he explicitly mentions degenerate whites, together with Indians, Negroes, and West Indian slaves. The tale suggests the seed of decay arrived from Europe, implying foreign corruption, and interestingly, science is presented as the potential power to eradicate the threat posed by this human evil, which is attributed to a hybrid familiar and a woman presumably coming from the lower classes. It blends racial, class, and gender anxieties.
And sometimes the racism is just incredibly blatant, like in Herbert West Reanimator.
Oh, absolutely. That story's racial repugnance is palpable and deeply disturbing. The reanimation of a clandestine black boxer is described with truly shocking language, referring to him before reanimation as a loathsome, gorilla-like thing with abnormally long arms.
Before reanimation?
Yes, before. That detail is crucial because it highlights Lovecraft's inherent bias and racist caricature. The horror isn't just in the reanimation, it's baked into his description of the man himself, drawing on racist tropes of the time.
And his anxieties weren't limited to specific races or ethnicities like African Americans or Southern Europeans. In The Horror at Red Hook, we see his fear of broader foreign influence, almost a general xenophobia.
That's a crucial point. The Horror at Red Hook expresses a profound rage and loathing at the foreigners, depicting a dizzying polyglot mix of different European nationalities, such as Spanish and Italian, and even Scandinavian settlements, not solely focusing on black people, which was the case in some of his other earlier works.
So anyone not like his idealized Teuton?
Pretty much. This suggests Lovecraft's fear extended to any perceived degeneration of the United States as a nation, viewing the mixing of any cultures or ethnic groups as an impossibility of assimilation. He saw it as a threat to his idealized, homogeneous American identity. The sheer chaos and unfamiliarity of immigrant communities in New York, where he briefly lived, terrified him, leading him to project these fears onto supernatural conspiracies involving devil worship and ancient cults.
It's truly unsettling to see how he tried to give these prejudices, these deeply ingrained bigotries, a scientific veneer. He adopted and even distorted scientific theories to support his racial ideas, didn't he? It's almost like he was creating his own perverse kind of science fiction out of real scientific ideas to make his prejudices feel legitimate.
It's insidious, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
He absolutely did. Lovecraft was heavily influenced by prominent theories of his time, often cherry-picking and twisting them to suit his worldview. He drew from Charles Darwin's ideas on natural selection, specifically embracing Thomas Malthus's rather grim opinion on the quick spread of the lower classes due to their excessive breeding. Yeah. He also took Herbert Spencer's concept of survival of the fittest, applying these principles not to species in nature, but disturbingly, to human races to justify social stratification and racial purity. This social Darwinism was a pervasive and harmful trend in his era, providing a pseudo-scientific basis for bigotry, and Lovecraft embraced it wholeheartedly to rationalize his prejudices.
And he also delved into polygenism and now discredited theory to further cement his views.
Yes, he explicitly read Louis Agassiz, a contemporary scientist who proposed polygynous ideas, the now debunked notion that different races were created as different species, fundamentally distinct and unequal, with Negroes, for instance, being in the lowest stage of human development.
So he used that to justify his hierarchy.
Exactly. Lovecraft readily used this to reinforce his fervent belief in Teutonic superiority, seeing his beloved Teutonic stock encompassing what he viewed as the pure Anglo-Saxon lineage in England, Germany, and the U.S. as the summit of evolution. He also strongly supported racial segregation in order to preserve the cultural heritage of the Teutonic races, demonstrating how he sought this warped scientific backing for his deeply racist convictions. It really shows how pervasive these ideas were in some circles, and how individuals like Lovecraft used them to justify their fears.
And finally, his own family history seems to have played a part in these anxieties, creating a very personal layer to his eugenics concerns, which must have been a terrifying prospect for him.
That's right. Lovecraft's eugenics anxiety wasn't purely abstract. It was also deeply rooted in his own family's history of mental illness. Both his father and his mother experienced significant mental health issues, with his father's syphilis leading to his institutionalization.
That must have cast a long shadow.
You'd have to imagine so. This personal experience likely fed into Lovecraft's fears of degeneration and tainted bloodlines, adding a deeply personal, though tragically misguided dimension to his broader societal prejudices. He feared the bad blood that could be passed down, reflecting the eugenicist ideas prevalent at the time about inherited traits and societal health.
That's a lot to unpack about his personal fears and how they manifest as monstrous allegories. Now let's shift gears and look at another core theme in Lovecraft. His complex, often fraught relationship with science and progress, and his deep-seated, almost desperate nostalgia for the past.
Right, the science angle is huge.
Science, in his stories, is rarely, if ever, a force for good, is it? It seems to lead only to dread.
No, it's quite the opposite of traditional science fiction, where knowledge is power and leads to solutions. Science is certainly a cornerstone in Lovecraft's narratives. His characters are often brilliant researchers, driven by an insatiable thirst for knowledge.
The classic mad scientist, almost.
Or just the doomed scholar. They frequently use science and technology to apprehend the truth hidden beyond their symbolic level of reality, to peel back the layers of illusion. Yet this relentless pursuit always leads to negative connotations. Madness, suicide, violent death, or disappearances.
Never ends well.
Never. It's not a path to enlightenment, but to absolute destruction. Science, in his work, consistently exposes contradictions that the symbolic real builds, revealing the utter fragility and artificiality of our perceived reality. The more you know, the more doomed you become.
So in his universe, the more you know, the more clearly you see the abyss, and the more doomed you are to fall into it. Lovecraft even famously suggested that science itself would become the ultimate source of horror, not just a tool to uncover it.
Exactly. Lovecraft famously suggested that science, while providing the intellectual backbone for his stories, will itself ultimately be a source of horror. He wrote that the very act of piecing together of dissociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality that it will drive humanity either to madness or force us to flee from the deadly light into the peace and safety of a new dark age.
A new dark age. Wow.
It's a profoundly pessimistic view of intellectual progress, where the ultimate truth is simply too terrible for the human mind to bear. It suggests that our very intellectual capacity is a dangerous thing, liable to uncover truths that unravel us.
We see this play out in various stories. In From Beyond, for instance, we have a literal machine that allows people to peer into hidden dimensions. It's science literally opening doors to what should remain unknown.
Yes, From Beyond features a particularly chilling invention, a machine that stimulates the pineal gland, allowing people to access entirely different planes of existence. It literally enables characters to overleap time, space, and dimensions, and without bodily motion peer to the bottom of creation.
Terrifying potential.
Absolutely. It externalizes and literalizes the terrifying idea that inaccessible worlds exist at our very elbows, just beyond our normal senses, accessible only through scientific technology. But, as always, this expanded perception leads only to horror, as invisible, monstrous entities become visible, and the protagonist, Dr. Crawford Tellingcast, is ultimately consumed by the very forces he unleashed.
And in Herbert West's Reanimator, science directly challenges one of humanity's most fundamental assumptions, the absolute finality of death. This seems like the ultimate transgression.
It absolutely is. That story deals directly with the scientific ability to surpass and overcome death, a notion that goes against the very fabric of human experience and belief. West's complex experiments with reanimation directly shatter the symbolic real, proving that death isn't the impenetrable barrier we believe it to be.
But it doesn't end well for West.
Not at all. This shattering of reality, however, doesn't lead to triumph or a medical breakthrough, but ultimately to West's own gruesome demise as the real, the resurrected horrors, absorb him in a vortex of vengeance. It's a clear illustration of how transgressing natural laws through scientific hubris leads inevitably to self-destruction and cosmic retribution.
The Dunwich Horror presents a slightly different take on science's role. Here, it seems to act more as a revealer of existing horrors rather than a creator.
That's a good distinction. In the Dunwich Horror, science plays a more revealing rather than enabling role, acting almost as a detective. It is the careful, meticulous dust created by the scientists, specifically the meticulous analysis by Dr. Armitage of Miskatonic University, that reveals the monstrosity of the invisible Wilbur Whately's twin brother.
The powder makes it visible.
Precisely. This creature is so utterly alien, so vast and impossible, that it contradicts the basic rules of nature and physics. Here, science acts as a means to uncover inherent abominations, showing how it can dismantle beliefs in the story, particularly those rooted in religion and traditional understanding. It doesn't create the horror, but it strips away the comforting veil, forcing an acceptance of things that should not exist.
And the Dreams in the Witch House interestingly ties mathematical witchcraft to ancient horrors, blurring the lines between arcane and scientific.
Precisely. In the Dreams in the Witch House, mathematical witchcraft, precise and almost scientific in its application, is presented as the very conduit through which horror from the distant past invades the present. It showcases how even abstract, seemingly logical scientific concepts can become the means for uncanny and terrifying manifestations.
Like forbidden knowledge unlocked through math.
Exactly. The protagonist, Walter Gilman, a mathematics student, delves into forbidden geometries and equations that allow passage between dimensions. It blurs the lines between arcane knowledge and modern science, all leading to inevitable dread as he finds himself entangled with a witch from the past and her monstrous familiar Brown Jenkin.
Beyond science, Lovecraft's work is steeped in a profound nostalgia and a rejection of modernity. It seems he truly believed the past is a secure place to hold, a sanctuary from a terrifying present.
He absolutely did. Lovecraft viewed the past, especially the pre-industrial, pre-immigrant, Anglo-Saxon-dominated past, as a bastion of security. It was, to him, devoid of the triviality of the present and the uncertainty of the future.
He romanticized it heavily.
Oh, immensely. He deeply valued tradition, particularly the classical heritage of Western civilization, and saw ethical values as rooted firmly in it. This yearning for a lost era, an almost aristocrat past, a golden age he felt was irrevocably gone, was a central pillar of his worldview, offering a stark, comforting contrast to the tumultuous present he found himself in. He genuinely mourned what he perceived as a decline.
And this intense yearning for the past led to his fierce criticism against modern society, including things like T.S. Eliot's incredibly influential poem, The Wasteland. He saw New York, where he briefly lived, as no longer American, just a hybrid mass without a pure stream of culture.
His disdain for modernism and modern life was indeed intense and well documented. He fiercely critiqued what he saw as a decline of Western values due to mechanized regimes, fearing an inevitable downfall into complete collapse.
Complete collapse. Pretty dramatic.
It was. He described New York, where he had a deeply unhappy period of his life, as being no longer American, a hybrid mass that had no connection to a pure stream of culture. This reflected his profound discomfort with multiculturalism, the rapid urban development, and the loss of what he considered to be traditional, pure American identity. His horror was not just cosmic, but deeply rooted in his sociocultural anxieties about an increasingly diverse and industrialized world.
We see this profound pessimism about modernity in tales like The Quest of Iran, which feels like a direct allegory for the fate of traditional art and values.
Absolutely. The Quest of Iran serves as a poignant, almost mournful allegory for the collapse of artistic talent and what Lovecraft saw as old-fashioned aristocratic putting on airs in the face of a 20th century dominated by universal suffrage, skyscrapers, and factories.
The modern world crushing the old ways.
Pretty much. The protagonist, a minstrel seeking a lost dream city, experiences an instant aging and ultimately suicide upon realizing his beautiful dream city was merely a fleeting illusion, a memory from his youth. This powerfully underscores Lovecraft's deep pessimism regarding the fate of traditional values and aesthetics in the harsh, materialist modern world. It's a very personal lament, you feel.
But then, interestingly, there's the moon bog, which offers a rare, almost unique triumph of the past over industrialization. This one stands out.
It absolutely does, making it an anomaly in his body of work. The moon bog is unique in Lovecraft's oeuvre, depicting a very clear triumph of the ancient past over modern industrialization. Lovecraft, a devotee of ancient Greek and Roman traditions, here showcases a victory of his revered Greek myth over contemporary men.
How does that play out?
The story centers on an American industrialist, named Denise Barry, actually, who attempts to drain an ancient, sacred bog in Ireland for commercial gain. This act, representing progress in industry, leads directly to a supernatural punishment. It demonstrates how nature, or the ancient world as represented by the mysterious moon goddess and her naiads, can reign supreme over science and progress.
So the old magic wins.
Yes. The moon goddess and naiads are depicted as the origins of modern civilization and culture, and the American industrialist, with his crude, profit-driven motives, is clearly the conflicting element, punished for disturbing the ancient sacred order. It's one of the few instances where his beloved past exerts dominance and exacts revenge. A bit of wish fulfillment, perhaps.
Maybe so. We've delved deep into Lovecraft's cosmic horrors and his very human anxieties, but let's take a moment to look at how he crafted these tales, his unique narrative style. His protagonists aren't your typical heroes with swords and shields, are they?
Not at all. And that's a key part of his distinctiveness. Lovecraft's protagonists are often intellectuals, scholars, or researchers, driven by an insatiable, almost pathological thirst for knowledge that ultimately leads to their undoing.
The curious cat, basically.
Exactly. They can also be adventurers or intrepid travelers exploring forgotten corners of the world, or even just flaneurs, those aimless wanderers like the narrator in The Call of Cthulhu, whose casual curiosity inadvertently pulls them into horrifying discoveries they wish they never made. Their defining trait is not bravery or strength, but an intense intellectual curiosity that ultimately exposes them to unbearable truths.
And he had a very specific sense of place, especially his recurring settings, which become characters in themselves.
He certainly did. His tales frequently take place in incredibly atmospheric, real or invented New England locations, steeped in a pervasive sense of decaying history, forgotten secrets, and lurking malevolence.
Arkham, Innsmouth, Dunwich.
Exactly. Places like the fictional university town of Arkham, the decaying, isolated port of Innsmouth, and the desolate, inbred community of Dunwich, with their infamous Miskatonic University, feel incredibly real due to his meticulous, often suffocating descriptions. These settings are more than just backdrops. They're often integral to the horror, mirroring the decay and hidden terrors within, embodying the very anxieties we've been discussing.
And structurally, his plots often follow a similar, chilling trajectory, almost like a descent into madness.
Yes, many stories involve a quest to find an object, such as the infamous Forbidden Grimoire, the Necronomicon, or a systematic investigation of strange, inexplicable events.
Following the breadcrumbs.
Right. This investigation invariably leads to a revelation or discovery of a disturbing truth about the vast, indifferent Lovecraftian mythos, or, horrifyingly, about the character's own hidden identity and ancestry. It's a slow, creeping unfolding of a dreadful reality, rather than a sudden shock. The tension builds through the gradual accumulation of disturbing clues and esoteric knowledge.
And the endings. They're rarely neat and tidy, are they? No triumphant heroes riding off into the sunset.
Far from it. The post-climax in Lovecraft's stories typically involves madness, often irreversible, self-inflicted suicide, or a desperate escape that doesn't truly resolve the horror.
The horror lingers.
Always. There's no true victory, no restoration of comforting order. The characters are either utterly consumed by the cosmic truth they've uncovered, driven permanently insane by its implications, or left to live with the indelible, shattering knowledge they've acquired, with the horror lingering, unresolved, and ever-present. The horror is rarely defeated. It simply retreats, maybe, to await another time.
It's remarkable to think about Lovecraft's journey from relative obscurity during his lifetime to becoming a cornerstone of academic study. How did his critical reception evolve over time? He was practically unknown, wasn't he?
He was indeed almost unknown during his life, publishing primarily in what were considered pulp magazines like Weird Tales, often paid very little, just scraping by. It wasn't until around 1975, really, that he began to gain significant academic interest. A pivotal shift that led to a clear proliferation of studies, conferences, and articles specifically dedicated to his fiction and tumultuous life. Earlier critical discussions often appeared in less formal amateur journals or fan publications, but gradually, scholarly rigor was applied to his work, recognizing its unique literary and philosophical depth despite the problematic elements.
And how have scholars approached his work over the years? What are some of the key critical approaches that help us understand his impact?
There are several prominent and insightful approaches. First, biographical studies, with S.T. Joshi's H.P. Lovecraft, A Life, and its expanded edition I Am Providence, being widely considered the most complete biography.
Joshi's work is foundational.
Absolutely. Joshi meticulously contextualizes Lovecraft's fiction through his vast collection of personal letters, providing invaluable insight into his mind and the direct influence of his experiences on his work. Then there are psychological approaches, like those by Yozen Mosig, who delved deep into Lovecraft's profound personal anxieties, his fears of the cold, of fish, of the sea, and connected them directly to his literary oeuvre, seeing how these anxieties were transmuted into cosmic terrors.
So really linking his internal world to his external creations. What about the craft of his writing itself, how he created that unique atmosphere?
For that, we turn to formalist analyses, such as those by Donald Burleson, who meticulously analyzed Lovecraft's narratological devices, his distinctive use of point of view, often a first-person narrator descending into madness, and the crucial unreliability of his narrators.
How the stories are told.
Exactly. This breaks down how he achieved his unsettling effects, showing the mechanics behind the cosmic dread. And, most relevant to our discussion today, there are philosophical and ideological approaches, powerfully exemplified by S.T. Joshi's The Decline of the West, which delves into Lovecraft's broader philosophical, ethical, and political views, including, most critically, his undeniable and deeply problematic racialism.
Which connects back to Žižek, too.
It does. This aligns perfectly with applying Žižek's theories on ideology to Lovecraft's tales, dissecting the underlying belief systems that shaped his horrific visions.
So why does Lovecraft continue to resonate so powerfully today, even with his problematic aspects? What's his enduring relevance beyond the text itself? Why do we keep coming back to Cthulhu?
That's the big question, isn't it? His work remains profoundly relevant for several profound reasons. First, his vision is starkly anti-humanist, seeing humanity as utterly insignificant, a mere fleeting blip in the cosmic scheme of things.
Not a very comforting thought.
Not at all. His inherent nihilism undermines humanistic hope, boldly positing that nihilism and humanism are on crash courses. For Lovecraft, it is almost logical for us to become extinct, given the true nature of the universe, which is a stark and deeply uncomfortable truth for many. This relentlessly challenges anthropocentric views, forcing us to confront our own smallness.
And this anti-humanism connects to more contemporary ideas, doesn't it? Things like post-humanism, which is a really relevant concept today.
Yes, his themes resonate remarkably with contemporary post-humanist ideas that reject traditional dualistic notions of human versus non-human. Post-humanism often views humans as human animals who are constantly co-evolving with technicity and materiality rather than being distinct from them.
We're part of the system, not above it.
Exactly. Nature, in Lovecraft's work, is often presented not as a benign backdrop, but as a quasi-agent, much like the sentient willows in Algernon Blackwood's stories, acting with its own unsettling, indifferent agency. However, Lovecraft's work also serves as a chilling caution against applying ethical or activist critical approaches that depend on human agency.
Why is that?
Because there's fundamentally no room for human agency whatsoever in his bleak cosmos. This is a key distinction. As his work suggests, our actions are ultimately futile and meaningless against truly cosmic forces. It resists easy appropriation for, say, activist readings that require human power to change things.
Ultimately, his monsters seem to be able to carry a lot of meaning for different eras, becoming symbols for whatever anxieties are pressing on us at the moment.
They absolutely do. The continued, almost magnetic appeal of Lovecraft's monsters lies in their extraordinary ability to serve as potent metaphors for societal anxieties. They are the smothering presences of immaterial anxieties manifesting themselves in the image of the monster.
We need to give fear a face.
Precisely. This happens because we, as humans, feel a profound need to name what threatens us, even when we lack full understanding or can't quite articulate the source of our fear. His monsters embody the unnameable fears that lurk in the collective unconscious, whether those fears are about social change, terrifying scientific revelations, or our profound existential insignificance. They give form to the formless dread.
So, what does this all mean? We've plunged deep into H.P. Lovecraft's world, seeing how his tales of cosmic horror were not just fantastical narratives, but deeply rooted in his personal feels of societal decay, his profound racial anxieties, and the terrifying, shattering revelations that scientific progress seemed to offer. His monsters, from the deep ones with their Innsmouth, look to the amorphous Shoggoths, become powerful allegories for the other, the unknown, and the overwhelming forces that constantly challenge his rigid traditional worldview.
We've seen how Lovecraft's work, though often unsettling and problematic in its underlying ideologies, offers a powerful, albeit dark lens through which to examine humanity's fragile place in a vast, indifferent universe.
Yeah, it really does.
It shows us how societal tensions and personal fears can, quite literally, give birth to our deepest, most unsettling monsters. He challenges us to confront the idea that our reality is just a fragile construction, always susceptible to being shattered by an unbearable truth.
That real again.
Exactly. His work forces us to ask, what if the things we fear most aren't out there in the stars, but reflections of what we're afraid to confront within ourselves and our societies?
And this leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to mull over. If Lovecraft's monsters were, in part, the materialization of his society's anxieties about immigration, about science pushing boundaries too far, and about a rapidly changing world, well, what monsters are we, in our own time, subconsciously manifesting through our collective fears?
Fears about artificial intelligence transforming our lives, maybe? Or the climate crisis reshaping our planet? Or even the rapid shifts in our social fabric?
Exactly. And what hidden, unsettling truth might these new emerging monsters be revealing about the fragility of our own symbolic real that we too are perhaps unable to fully describe or comprehend?
Something to think about.
Something for you to ponder until our next deep dive.